Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research's Public Policy Forum. We'll be featuring guests today and discussing the Michigan Dam Safety Task Force report. We'll wait a couple of minutes for people to sign on, and then we'll get started. Thank you for being here. Okay, why don't we get started? Again, thanks for being with us. My name is Arnold Weinfeld. I'm Associate Director of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research at Michigan State University. And we're very pleased today to have with us guests to discuss the Michigan Dam Safety Task Force report. Before I get started, I'd like to have a couple of reminders from the IPPSR side. Our next forum will be on April the 7th and will feature a discussion on K-12 schools past pandemic recovery. And we've got a great panel assembled here, a national panel that will feature Doug Harris, Tulane University professor and recent author of the book Charter School City, Paula Herbart, who is president of the Michigan Education Association, Andre Townsell, superintendent of Benton Harbor Schools, and Nicholas Paradiso, who is vice president for government relations with National Heritage Academy. So that should be a very, very interesting forum. Again, that'll be on April the 7th. On April the 29th is our Michigan Political Leadership Program annual event, usually a dinner event, but will again be held online this year. Our speaker will be Charlie Cook, a nationally known political insider. You can sign up for this at mplp.msu.edu. And for those legislative staffers that have joined us, our next legislative staff training will be on May 7th. So look for information on that as well. And I apologize, but my webcam's not working today, so I'm kind of behind the scenes. But let's get started. I'll do a brief introduction of our speakers, and then we'll get moving. So with us today is Doug Jester, who served as the vice chair of the Michigan Dam Safety Task Force. Doug is a partner in the company 5 Lakes Energy, and he has served as a senior energy policy advisor at the Michigan Department of Energy, Labor, and Economic Growth previously. He's also served in various capacities at the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. Our next speaker is Bill Rustom. Bill was a member of the Dam Safety Task Force, and he has been a former advisor to 2 previous governors. Bill was chief staff advisor on environmental matters to former Governor William Milliken, and also director of strategy for the Office of Strategic Policy under Governor Rick Snyder. Bill also has been involved with public sector consultants over the years as well. And our third presenter today, actually our first presenter, will be Luke Trumbull. Luke serves as supervisor for the Dam Safety Unit in the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. He has spent also 2.5 years in the private sector as a consulting engineer, and started his career in the Department of Energy, Labor, and Economic Growth as a public utilities engineer in the Electric Reliability Division. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Luke. And Luke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Arnold. I will attempt a screen share here. All right. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction, kind of set the table for Bill and Douglas to speak about the Michigan Dam Safety Task Force, but I wanted to provide a little bit of background information on what led us to form the Dam Safety Task Force. So an outline of what I'll cover is I'll give a very brief overview of the Michigan Dam Safety Program. A recap of the May 19th, 2020 failure event that kind of spurred us into high gear to take a look at dam safety in the state of Michigan, which was followed by Governor Whitmer's directive, which led to the independent forensic investigation of those 2 dam failures in Midland and Gladwin counties. An ASDSO, that's Association of State Dam Safety Officials, peer review of the dam safety program, the formation of the Dam Safety Task Force, and then the next steps that the state is planning. So just a brief history. The dam safety programs at the state level started in Michigan in the 1970s. It was kind of when on a national level, people were starting to look at dam safety a lot closer, and it was spurred on by the failure of 2 major dams out west, which later led to the formation of the National Dam Safety Program under FEMA and the states to start to organize dam safety programs as well. At that time, the state had very limited ability to regulate dams. They really only had the authority to permit construction of new dams. We didn't really have a lot of authority to have dams inspected, to require any type of safety requirements of existing dams, et cetera. That came later in 1990 with the Public Act 300, or the Dam Safety Act, which really gave the state its regulatory teeth to regulate the safety of existing dams. And then later those were superseded in 1994 by the NREPA, the Natural Resources Environmental Protection Act, which kind of Act 300 became Part 315 dam safety, and also Part 307 inland lake levels superseded all previous legal lake level statutes, which are often associated with dams. So, and both of those laws are currently still in effect. Historically, the dam safety program had 2 to 3 staff engineers, most recently 2, and a supervisor. Until very recently, kind of following the failures, we did actually get approval to hire back that 3rd engineer. So this is the current dam safety coverage map. You'll see that there's 3 engineers covering the state of Michigan, and then I am the supervisor. We actually have approval to hire 1 more. So we'll have kind of a staff another staff member who will probably take over the Northern Territory. And then our other engineer, Dan Devon, would be more of a senior advisory, kind of role. So that's a good thing that's happened, already. Just a quick snapshot, there are over 2,600 dams in Michigan that we know about. Of those, 825 roughly are regulated under Part 315. Another 235 are regulated under Part 307, which is the inland lake level statute, which basically it's commonly referred to as legal lake levels, where a court ordered establishes a lake level on a lake that must be maintained, typically by a dam. And then there's about 92 federal energy regulatory regulated dams. Those are the hydropower dams. And then the remainder are those small unregulated dams that are out there but don't have direct oversight. And there's a link, if we're going to share the slides afterward, there's a link to an interactive map on our website that gives some more information about the regulated dams. So just a brief recap of the event that led up to the dam failures in Midland and Gladwin counties. There was widespread 3 to 5 inches of rainfall over 48 hours over the 17th and 18th. There were some local reports of up to 8 inches of rain over that same 48-hour period. I believe that those were mostly in like Aranac, Iosco counties and the Rifle River watershed, but still, some pretty heavy rain. Several dams in the area sustained damage or were at high alert for failure because water levels were so high. And then, with the Edenville Dam, which is the largest dam on the Tittabawassee River, it failed at 5:30 p.m. on May 19th, and it was an embankment failure at the east end of the dam. The resulting flood wave contributed to the downstream failure of the Samford Dam, and the combined flood wave from both dam failures impacted 2,500 homes and businesses and forced the evacuation of around 11,000 people. And during that event, you know, myself and other dam safety staff were on site on the hours leading up to the failure, working with the owner, you know, to make sure that, you know, anything that could be done to save the dam was being done, and that, you know, once it was clear that the dam was going to fail, that the appropriate response and evacuations and things were happening. And then following the failure, you know, there's a big breach in the dam with ongoing erosion concerns that we had concerns moving forward. And I won't get into that too much, but Eagle actually had to step in and do some emergency work at Edenville Dam to stabilize and further lower the water level behind the dam. And it's being completed now. And this is a picture I took, you know, at the time the dam was failing, you know, standing on the east end of the dam, looking at the breach. You know, you can see water is flowing through the earthen embankment. A couple days later, this is what it looks like. You know, this is some drone footage that we had taken of the breach area with the upstream lake pretty much drained. And this would be the east side, the Tittabawassee, where the Tittabawassee River comes in. This is a photo on the west side of the dam, looking kind of back to the east, where you can see that where the Tobacco River comes in, which is in the foreground of this photo, is still pretty full pond. But it is flowing through a breach in the M30 bridge to the east to that previous photo that I had shown. So this is part of the concern that we had, was there's still a lot of water behind the dam, and there's a lot of erosion, active erosion going on. So you know, later, about 2 hours later, the Samford Dam failed. This was an overtopping where water flowed over top of the dam, largely resulting from the increased flow from the failure of Tittabawassee River. The breach occurred near the west end, but it was slowed somewhat because the water level below the dam came up so high, so quickly, as the flow started to increase. And we had the same type of response, you know, during that event as well. And here's a picture I took as water just started coming over the dam. This is where it was no longer safe to be out there, and I backed off into the driveway and started to, you know, the water started to actually trickle over the dam. This is a photo from the next day. You can see that, you know, all the debris that's piled up against the spillway and powerhouse, and then you know, there's grass in the background and water flowing where an earthen embankment used to exist. And this is what I said, you couldn't really see the extent of the damage because the water in Samford was so high, until a couple days later. Then when the water levels receded, we were able to see the full extent. And it looked like this, you know, with the lake fully drained and the water going around the dam through the breach to the right, which is west on this picture. This is looking downstream, and this is looking back up at what used to be Samford Lake. So just some photos to kind of outline the event that really got us into high gear to start thinking a little bit more about this stuff. And here's a slide that I had brought from a previous presentation, but I wanted to show that, you know, the blue line is the measured water level in Midland, at the gauge in Midland. And you can see around, you know, 1 p.m. Tuesday, May 19th, the water level was starting to kind of taper off, and it was expected that it was going to peak somewhere in between 31 and 32 feet, you know, in Midland, which was somewhat less than the 33.9 feet, which was the previous flood of record, which was the 1986 flood, you know, where all of Midland area was flooded. It was projected to be somewhere on the order of a 100-year event, you know, roughly a 100-year event. And then with the failure of the two dams, you can see that the graph stops flattening out and starts to jump straight up, and it peaks at 35.05 feet, which was roughly equivalent of a 500-year flood event when you factor in the two dam failures. So you can see how much water the dam failures added to the system. So immediately following, Governor Whitmer issued a directive to Eagle to do two things really: to investigate the cause of the dam failures, and then to take a really deep evaluation of dam safety practices in the state of Michigan and report those back to her. The failure investigation is being handled with an independent team. It's kind of outside of the Eagle staff are participating only in providing information to the team, and the team was formed by Ferc and Eagle of industry renowned experts in dam safety and dam failure investigations, and they are working on a 12 to 18 month time frame. They really got started in earnest in August 2020, so we expect that somewhere between August 2021 and the beginning of the next year we would see the final report on the causes of the failures. The first step in taking a quick or a deep look at the dam safety program by the state was to contract with the Association of State Dam Safety Officials peer review program, and it's a well-established program that's completed reviews at 49 peer reviews of state dam safety programs, 4 of privately owned dam safety programs, and 18 federal programs. The team that was assigned to Michigan had over 140 years of combined dam safety experience, from consulting, from dam ownership, and state regulatory representatives. They met with us and got a lot of information in August, and then presented their final report to us on September 4th, 2020. That report was shared with the Dam Safety Task Force and the findings of that report on the second meeting of the task force, which was October 1. And it kind of serves as the baseline for the recommendations of the task force. And we still do consult with the peer review team as needed for clarification or examples of what's happening in other states, that we could learn from. The Dam Safety Task Force, and I won't steal Douglas or Bill's thunder, but it was formed, in August, September 2020, of 19 members from various areas and stakeholder groups. The first meeting was September 8th, 2020, and it met every 3 weeks until February 3rd. There were several subcommittee groups that broke out and tackled individual tasks, and those happened in that time frame as well. And the final report was issued February 25th, and that's available. I think a lot of folks probably have seen that. And just real quickly, the next steps that we have planned, obviously is we're all anxiously awaiting the independent forensic team's investigation report, which we expect, fall of this year to early spring next year. But there were some things that Eagle, the dam safety program, could take from the recommendations of the task force and start to implement kind of internally. And so we've are reviewing those and prioritizing those. Right now, we've already been authorized to almost double the budget of the dam safety program and increase the staff levels. So we've hired two engineers. I transferred as a full-time supervisor of the unit, and we have authorization to hire one more. So we'll have 4 engineers and a supervisor, probably in April. That doesn't quite meet the recommendations of the task force or the ASDSO team, but it's a good step in the right direction. In 21 and beyond, we anticipate that we're going to form stakeholder groups and expand and refine the task force recommendations, to try to get those to where they could be implemented, and then start work with the legislature to try to get the necessary laws and statute changes made and obtain funding, etc. So, and I won't go into detail on what that is, because I think Bill and Douglas are, but that's really just all I had for kind of a brief introduction to kind of set up what was the impetus for the Michigan Dam Safety Task Force.
Great background. Thanks so much, Luke, for that. Really appreciate you setting the platform for the discussion. Before we move on to Doug and Bill, just a couple of things. Number one, I should have announced that if you have a question, please use the Q&A box to type in that question. And before we move on to Doug and Bill, I've got a couple here for you, Luke, that you might be able to answer. Someone asks if there's public information available to find out if your property is within a potential flood zone if a dam fails.
Sure, I want to make sure I wasn't muted. So for high and significant hazard potential dams, those are dams that if they failed, they would cause downstream impacts that could impact people or, you know, economics, things like that. The owner is required to produce an emergency action plan, which outlines the areas that would be impacted. Those aren't typically shared publicly by the dam safety program, but they can be by the county, the local emergency management folks, and the owner, and they can be requested and sometimes provided, for those. But that is one of the gaps I think that the group kind of understood, is that people downstream of dams don't always know that they're in an inundation area. If the dam were to fail, that their house might be impacted. So I think that's one of the things we're working on, but there is a process to request that. It's typically not made public, widely public, unless requested. So
yeah, sounds like you should be contacting your county emergency management division, if anything. So one more, we'll do one more, and then we'll go to Doug. Question, it appeared the Samford Dam had a rock auxiliary spillway. So why did that dam breach? And also it appears the Edenville Dam had no spillway. Is that correct?
the Edenville Dam had 2 concrete gated spillways, but no auxiliary spillway. The Samford Dam did have what's called a fuse plug, or a rock auxiliary spillway, which is meant for the rock to erode away and open up, kind of an opening in the dam to allow more flow to pass. That spillway, and I like I said, that was a FERC regulated dam, so we're not the experts on that one, but the intention of a fuse plug spillway is to meet the design flood for the dam. They're not always designed for a upstream breach, to save a dam from an upstream breach. So oftentimes what happens is the flows resulting from a dam failure upstream are higher than a flood that the dam is designed to be able to pass. So because typical flooding from rain is different from flooding from a dam failure, that spillway wasn't likely designed to pass the resulting flood from a dam failure upstream. So again, that, like I said, we're not the experts on that dam because it was federally regulated, but that's typically how those spillways work.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get to further discussion on the regulatory structure as we move along. Let me introduce Doug Jester. As I noted, Doug is a partner in the Five Lakes Energy Company, and he also served as vice chair of the task force. Doug, reflections, perspective, please.
Thanks, Arnold. As Arnold indicated, I served as vice chair of the Dam Safety Task Force. The chair was Evan Pratt, who's the Water Resources Commissioner for Washtenaw County, and Don Broshak from Consumers Energy served as our secretary. The 3 of us formed the executive committee for the task force. The task force was supported by Eagle staff and by public sector consultants in working through our deliberations and producing the final report. The report was adopted unanimously by the 19 members of the task force, who broadly represented all walks of life related to dams. The task force scope needs a little bit of discussion. First of all, we did work from the recommendations of the peer review team from the Association of State Dam Safety Officials, but we did not limit our discussion to their recommendations, and in fact made a number of recommendations that were not within their scope. We also recognized that there were and are ongoing investigations of the particulars of the Edenville and Samford Dam failures. And so while we were informed by those events, we were not primarily focused on those events. We were looking at the broad sweep of the dam safety program, past dam safety failures in Michigan and elsewhere, and the issues that arose from those. In Luke's presentation, it's clear that there was a substantial flood event, and had there not been dam failures, there probably would have been some flood damage in that area. So just want to point out that our recommendations relate to dam safety and not to the broad topic of flood control or flood management. Those are areas that likely warrant some attention, but were not part of our remit. So just wanted to be clear that we're focused on dam safety broadly, not specifically these dams, and not all flood control issues. The task force, after an initial meeting, we organized into certain work groups, which correspond to the topic areas that I'm going to get to in a moment. Those work groups, with facilitation from public sector consultants, did some brainstorming about issues that they thought needed attention, and also reviewed the dam safety official recommendations in their topic areas, and then brought recommendations back to the larger group. The larger group worked through those in discussions. Public sector consultants and the executive committee really worked to try to put together a draft that we thought would approach consensus, and then we had several meetings where we went through each and every recommendation that had been compiled at that point, made adjustments, and then finally a review of the final report from which there were some language adjustments. So even though it was a fairly quick effort, we feel like we've been pretty thorough in thinking through the issues, coming to a set of recommendations, and coming to consensus. Broadly, want to say that the dam safety program that we've had at Eagle and its predecessor agencies, while important, is not sufficient. There are important gaps in law, in capacity, and tools to ensure dam safety. And so the task force strongly recommends that actions be taken both by Eagle within its existing authority and capacity, but also that there be additional legislation and funding made available to address dam safety. As you heard, there are about 2,600 dams. A substantial number of them are medium or high hazard potential dams, meaning that they could cause substantial harm. Others would at least cause harm to natural resources. So I'm going to sort of go through the topic areas and mention highlights of the recommendations so that we have that background, and then Bill will emphasize the things of greatest importance. The first topic that we focused on is funding for dam maintenance, repair, and removal. And the first point we want to make here is that the task force essentially universally agreed that financial responsibility for maintaining and repairing dams rests with the dam owner, and that we have insufficient legal requirements and insufficient enforcement tools to ensure that all dam owners meet that responsibility. We also recognize that there are a lot of dams that are probably no longer economic, and it is not safe to allow them to continue in place and molder without adequate maintenance and repair. Those dams that don't have sufficient economic value to warrant somebody, paying for the maintenance and repair ought to be removed. And removal often may not be within the financial capacity of the dam owner. So we made recommendations for mechanisms for sort of properly balancing dam owner responsibility and then public funding for removal. So that was the first topic area. The second thing is that we looked broadly at need for legislation and whether there was sufficient authority to assure public safety and the protection of natural resources with respect to dams, and found that there were a number of limitations. So we made recommendations in that area. Some of them are, very specific sorts of fixes to the existing dam safety law. Others suggested that we need a system of licensing and mandatory financial responsibility from dam owners. We also had a group look at dam safety. Some of this was, details of how dams should be inspected and the way in which dam owners should interact with downstream property owners and the like. So those recommendations are included. We also saw that there were holes in both law and in Eagle policy on compliance and enforcement with dam safety requirements, made recommendations there. The emergency response officials in counties were represented and pointed to a number of challenges they have with preparing for and then acting on emergencies related to dams. We have a good set of recommendations there. And then finally, really based in the report of the peer review team, we endorsed a lot of recommendations related to program management, funding, and budgeting for the dam safety program in Eagle. And broadly there, we're looking for additional resources so they will have the means to actually execute a proper dam safety program, but also emphasizing that within the program, there needs to be a focus on a risk-based approach to priorities and actions that should be taken, so that over time we can reduce the risks to the public from the fleet of dams that we have. So that's a quick overview of the topics that we treated and how we came to those recommendations. With that, I want to turn it over to Bill to talk about the most important aspects of our recommendations.
Thanks, Douglas. Yeah, I just want to emphasize everybody that the failure of the two dams up in Midland and Gladwin counties really was a wake-up call for the state of Michigan. In this country, we have ignored our infrastructure for far too long. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about your roads and bridges or wastewater treatment plants or public drinking water supplies or dams. We have had a tendency to build them and then not maintain them. And that's a fundamental problem that government is facing today. And that problem is compounded, frankly, by climate change. You see more frequent big rainstorms, intense rainstorms. We're going to see those in the future under climate change. You see stormwater systems overflowing. All of those things that relate to our infrastructure. You see more freeze and thaw cycles in our roads. All of those things related to climate change are making the issue of dealing with our infrastructure, which we have ignored for far too long, more and more difficult, and will be more difficult in the future. So part of what this task force was designed to do was to, as a wake-up call, woken up by those two dam failures up in the Thumb area of Michigan, was to say, hey, it's time to take a good look at how we're dealing with our infrastructure, how we're maintaining it, with an understanding that we are going to face greater challenges in the future as the climate continues to change. There are some 84 recommendations in the report. I'm not going to go through all of them. I just want to highlight a few that I think, and I think the others on the panel will agree, are the most important. First of all, we recommended that instead of a one-time permit for a dam, we move to a licensing structure. We all know that a dam is not going to be there forever. It can't last forever. There's no way it can last forever without appropriate maintenance. So rather than issuing a permit by the state that says, okay, go ahead and build the dam and you're done, we want to put a time frame. We recommend putting a time frame that you have to have that license renewed periodically. After 10, 20, 30 years, it's got to be renewed. The second thing that Douglas mentioned was we want to make it clear that the financial responsibility for maintaining the dam, making certain that it's operating appropriately, for removal of the dam when it needs to be removed, rests with the dam owner. That's not clear in current statute. So making certain that the financial responsibility is where it belongs with the dam owner for maintaining and for correcting problems that may exist rests with that dam owner. There were a series of other important, that's one of the most important things, two of the most important things. Licensing, moving to licensing as opposed to a one-time permit, and two, assuring that the dam owner is responsible for maintaining that dam and for removing it after its useful life. We recognize that there is a problem with certain dams as it relates to that funding. So we recommended the creation of an emergency fund to deal with emergencies. As Douglas alluded to, a fund that assists with the removal of dams that have outlived their usefulness and appropriate staffing in Eagle. You know, when Luke put up that first sign that you know, they have 2 engineers and now 3, that was inadequate for 2,600 dams across Michigan. It's totally inadequate. So we recommended significant increasing in staffing levels of Eagle for dams of the dam safety program. Another important recommendation was, how do you deal with dams that are now regulated by Ferc, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission? How do you deal with those? One of the problems that we recognized in the task force was the fact that Ferc basically licenses dams for the production of electricity. What happened in that situation was when Ferc removed for those dams the ability of those dams to continue to function under Ferc producing electricity, it got turned over to Eagle. Well, one of the difficulties was that after 9/11, information flow from the federal government to the public or to state agencies contracted. That was an effort to protect the nation's infrastructure. Well, in doing so, it made it difficult for DEQ to understand what the condition was of those dams when they ended up taking over the responsibility for regulating them after that Ferc license had been revoked. So one of the other key recommendations was that there should be a memorandum of understanding between the state of Michigan and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as to the sharing of information while that dam is under Ferc's control. There are recommendations in this report that affect other state agencies like the DNR, who owns and maintains their own dams, and what they ought to do. There are recommendations that affect local governments in terms of their emergency planning. There are recommendations that relate to transparency, the question about public information of whether or not you live in a floodplain or could be affected. We had some recommendations related to those, and there are recommendations for the federal government in this report, doing a better job of providing information to the state when that dam is going to move from Ferc regulatory control to state regulatory control. So again, I'll just emphasize the key to me is moving from the current permitting system to a licensing system, a finite period of time after which a dam must be a license must be renewed, or the dam is removed. As Douglas said, we were cognizant of the fact that in many instances that our state regulatory system was built to protect both human safety and human habitation. At the same time, it protects natural resources. If you go back about 30 or 40 years, there was a dam in northeastern Michigan that failed that affected a major trout stream. So it's not just public and human habitation that must be protected, but our natural resources as well. So again, in sum, moving from the present permitting system to a licensing system, and assuring that financial responsibility rests with that dam owner. And if they need assistance, the state can provide assistance for them maintaining that dam and or removing it over the long term. Those are the key recommendations. As I said, there are a whole lot of other recommendations. There are 84 in total, but those are the key ones.
We've got a few questions. So thank you, Bill, and thank you, Douglas, for that that summary. We've got a few questions rolling in, and I'll get to those in a second. But let's stay on the subject of the recommendations. Bill, as you noted, there were 84 or 86 recommendations. You talked about some of the top recommendations in your view. So I'd like to ask each of you, what do you see as the low-hanging fruit? I mean, there's a lot here that needs to be done. Bill, you've correctly emphasized the point regarding the bigger picture of infrastructure. Is there any low-hanging fruit in terms of the regulatory, legal, or funding issues that can be moved on rather quickly?
Well, I think the lowest hanging fruit is increasing the Eagle's staff capacity, and the governor has made recommendations to do that, so that we put in place a more adequate enforcement and regulatory system than we have at present. You just can't regulate 2,600 dams with 3 people. It's absolutely impossible in Michigan. It can't be done. So moving in the direction of an improved infrastructure to deal with the regulatory and enforcement mechanisms is probably the lowest hanging fruit. We do need to adopt new laws, however. We're going to have to do that. We're going to have to do that if we're going to deal with the long-term challenges that dams provide to us. We've got to move to this system of licensing and got to assure where the financial responsibility rests. So that's what I'd say is the lowest hanging fruit, is dealing immediately with the lack of attention that state government has paid to the regulatory infrastructure in Eagle.
Douglas, any thoughts on your end on what some of the low-hanging fruit may be?
I think Bill is right to focus quickly and initially on Eagle's capacity, and to do most of the other things will require either budgetary authorization or legislation. A couple of things that can be done through appropriations without significant legislation are providing a sort of standing fund for emergency action that Eagle can gain access to when dam owners are unable or unwilling to respond to emergency conditions. Those funds would only be for breaching the dam or otherwise, getting to a safe condition, but not for rectifying repairs that are needed or dam removal or anything like that. But Eagle needs that capacity in particular on top of the staffing that they need to manage the dam safety program. And then we know that when confronted with the financial responsibility to take care of their dams, there are a number of dam owners who will want out. And we've recommended that there be some public funds available in the form of grants for planning. So people can figure out, what their problem is, what funding will be required, and then work on that. But particularly for publicly owned dams, that's a necessity. And then we will get to the harder stuff, but it's really important to look at the points that Bill made. The licensing, so that there's periodic review of a dam and a period of financial responsibility, after which either the dam owner needs to demonstrate that they are able to continue maintaining the dam or deal with the removal. And that will be no doubt difficult, but it's just essential. I note that Ferc, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, recently did public notice that they're going to examine ways in which Ferc licensed dams can be subjected to a dam owner financial responsibility requirement similar to what we recommended. So this is a problem that hasn't really been wrestled with in most places across the country, and both we and the federal government need to deal with it.
Luke, I'd like to just ask a bit about that funding issue. The report called for $420 million over 20 years, I believe. I'm not sure there was a source identified, was there?
Not specifically, depending on, what, the 420 million was broken up over several recommendations, I believe. One, being like a revolving loan fund, that probably would take some, some appropriations on the front end, but then might be self-sustaining at some point, or might need to be, replenished. There was also talk of an emergency fund that would be, would also take a substantial initial investment from general fund or other sources, appropriations, but then might be replenished to some extent by cost recovery and fines and things like that. So, I mean, it's kind of detailed a little bit, just some ideas, but I believe a lot of that work needs to be fleshed out of what would be potential funding sources, what levels are appropriate, how long, and how they could potentially be replenished if they do become depleted. But I think as Doug and Bill both said, the focus is that there are pots of money available for owners and for the state to access, so that we don't always end up in a position where a dam is deteriorating and there's no viable funding source to maintain it, or to remove it, if that's the case. So not specifically identified, but I think that's part of the work going forward, right?
So has there been any, as Bill mentioned, and as we all know, this was just another signal of a deteriorating infrastructure. Has there been any discussion that you've been involved with at Eagle or within the administration regarding how best to apply, or if there's an opportunity to apply federal funding from the Rescue Act or future federal funding? There's talk of a very large infrastructure program being introduced in Congress in the near future. Some say between $3 and $4 trillion. Is there any discussion of making use of any of those monies should they become available to help with this kind of infrastructure issue?
I don't think that the conversations have gotten to that point yet. we just got the final recommendations in February. So I have not been involved. That doesn't mean that, the department isn't talking about that. So
Okay.
not that I know of.
All right.
Let me respond a little bit, Arnold. If you look back through history, there's always been a really important partnership between the federal government and the states when it relates to infrastructure. That's the way in which our highways were built. It's the way in which our wastewater treatment systems were built. And more recently, it is the way in which our public water supplies are built. So rekindling that kind of a partnership again, to me, is important for all the infrastructure in the country, including the dams. So as Congress moves forward, I think you're going to see some discussion of including dams in that infrastructure package. And hopefully this nation begins to get serious about maintaining its infrastructure, because it hadn't been serious for a long, long time.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Bill. You and I have had this discussion and tried to work on this issue for a long, long time. And whether it's another bridge collapse or dam failure or road failure, it's seen now all throughout the year, all over the country. Let's get to some of the questions from our attendees. I don't know if any of you could answer this regarding the tax base loss to the region. I don't know if there's been any economic studies that might best be answered by some of the regional economic development agencies, but was that an area that you all looked at in terms of this was strictly on dam safety? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. On the Eagle side, we do have cost estimates for, damages, structural damages, as part of the FEMA response, but I'm not aware of any study, at least by our department, that looked at tax impacts.
Yeah. Like I said, Beth who asked that question might be best asked of some of the regional economic development organizations or regional planning organizations, such as the East Michigan Council of Governments. Another question from David: if the two dams were not constructed in the past to withstand a failure from one upstream, is it expected that the pending new construction will address that issue?
That one's probably for me as well. So there's nothing in state statute currently that says a dam must be able to withstand a flood from an upstream failure. It certainly is a consideration in emergency action planning, that if a failure of an upstream dam is expected to cause failure of a downstream dam, that the impacts associated with that dam failure are captured in the emergency action plan for appropriate response. So there's not a requirement, but I think it definitely can be a consideration to look at dam breach, flows, and see how the downstream dams would fare during the permitting process. But like I said, that's my understanding, is that the permitting process for if those dams are to be reconstructed is several years out. And we don't have any information in front of us to evaluate for that now, but it definitely can be a consideration, moving forward.
Arnold, this is Douglas. I'd like to just supplement here that one of the recommendations from the task force goes to the fact that in Michigan, we currently only require that a dam be designed for half of something called the probable maximum flood. This is a civil engineering calculation of the level of flow, sort of maximum level of flow that might be expected at a dam. And we need to upgrade our requirements there. Now, that'll take time for dam owners to respond to, but sort of the capacity of spillways and so on needs to reflect both the real risks and modern rainfall patterns. And that's an area that we need to do some work on, even aside from, the possibility of an upstream dam failing.
So,
I was going to mention the same recommendation as Bill again, but also we need, as Douglas just said, our rainfall patterns are changing. it's happening because of climate change, and they're going to change more in the future. And recalculating all of those numbers is an important step toward protecting both the public safety and the natural resources of the state of Michigan.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, Bill, because these rainfall patterns that are changing also impact drought patterns that are changing right along with them.
Absolutely.
Yep. Jan Beecher from MSU's Institute for Public Utilities asked the question, was there consideration to require life cycle plans and financial reserves for both maintenance and decommissioning, plus insurance and a fee for regulatory oversight and enforcement?
Yeah, this is Douglas. Let me respond first on that. For those that don't know, Jan is director of the Institute for Public Utilities at Michigan State University and has a deep background in how utility finance is done. The recommendations that we made are along those lines. So essentially, we said that the dam owner needs to be sort of continuously setting aside funds for anticipated maintenance and for the ultimate removal of the dam at the end of its planned or expected life. We also recommended that there be an obligation to provide insurance against the damages that would occur in the event of dam failure, which then brings the insurance industry into the process of making sure that risks are properly managed. I would say John Broshak, who was part of the executive committee for the task force and an important voice, is responsible for hydropower facility management and operations at Consumers Energy, and they're an exemplar for how to do this right. And the recommendations that we made reflected their approach.
Great. Anything further to add to that, Luke or Bill? No.
Only to say that that's precisely what we recommended, and yeah, as we and I have to say that John from Consumers was helpful in helping us put together the recommendations in that regard. So that's where Michigan needs to move. This placing the financial responsibility for both the maintenance and the removal of the dam on the person that owns the dam, and providing sufficient insurance to assure that any emergencies are taken care of. And Douglas made a key point. You don't have to rely on government entirely to do the entire regulatory system if you require insurance. We've learned this through a number of environmental laws in history. If you get the private insurers involved, which we're recommending be done, they will help assure that compliance is met. So that's a key recommendation for bringing in another private sector partner to help with the regulatory process here.
Got a question from Greg, who asks about engineering codes. Is there an engineering code that we use to assess dam safety and construction?
So there's not a specific code in Michigan for construction of dams. There's the Part 315 dam safety statute, which sets forth criteria which a dam must meet, safety criteria, flow capacity criteria, things like that. And then it's not as specific, as like a specification document or something like that. That usually comes from kind of the standard practice in the program in the industry, which we draw from federal and other state agencies of what are appropriate design standards for dams and safety standards. So there's not a Michigan specific code that comes from a conglomeration of best practices from the industry.
Thanks, Luke.
Yep.
Interesting question here in terms of safety. Are impacts on downstream flooding in urban areas if a dam is constructed to create a reservoir that consumed upstream floodplain capacity considered?
So that's probably for me as well. The short answer is that we not very many dams are being constructed. I think I know of just a few, maybe one or two that were actually on a stream in Michigan in the last 10 years or so, so not very, there's not very many dams, new dams being constructed. So I guess if the question pertained to reconstruction of a failed dam in this case, or if we did get an application to construct a new dam, absolutely yes. Impacts to flood storage, that would have been occupied by the water in the impoundment would definitely be considered. And we cannot permit a project that causes that would cause additional flooding. It's under a different authority. It's the floodplain authority in Part 31, but we are not allowed to issue a permit that would cause additional flooding upstream. So
I have one more question posted. We've got a couple of minutes. If anyone else has a question, please do so. And I don't even know if this can be answered by anybody, but someone asked again, Greg, if the DNR has conducted or is conducting fisheries and habitat damage assessment below the failed dam, similar to the federal NRDA process.
the short answer is yes.
Good. Okay. That's a great answer.
And Arnold, let me just go back to the previous question for just a quick second, because Luke said something that's very important here. That new dam construction is not happening very quickly in Michigan. I mean, we're talking about dams that are 30, 50, 100 years old across Michigan. That's what we're talking about. And that is true of, again, I'm going to go back to the overall infrastructure question. That's true of our infrastructure generally. We are not constructing new freeways. We're not doing it. We are not constructing new highways. We're not doing it. We are not constructing new wastewater treatment plants. We're not doing it. What we have to do is maintain those that we have. And that's the struggle for the country and for Michigan. How do we assure that we have sufficient resources to maintain what we have? Because we haven't emphasized that enough. It's as if we've taken the attitude that if we build it, it'll last forever. And that is not true of any of our infrastructure. So I think that's an important point to be made.
Thank you, Bill. Much like we know that in the recent past, some local units have turned paved roads into gravel, it also might be time to take a look at getting rid of some of these dams as well.
Absolutely.
A question again, is there, and Luke, you may have answered this in one of the first questions, but I'm not sure. Is there a registry of dams to see, where these are located or if they've been inspected?
Yep, and I actually just typed a response to that to have the person question to email me of the particulars, and I can get that to them. But if we make the slides available, or otherwise, we could email a link to the participants. But we have an interactive map with all the regulated dams. It doesn't have the Ferc dams or the unregulated dams on it, but we do maintain a larger database of the 2,600 plus dams, and we have quite a bit of information on them. Less for the ones that we don't regulate because we're not, in constant communication with the dam owner. But yes, that information, if not publicly available, we do have it and generally can provide that information upon request. So I put my email in the chat so they can reach out directly to me.
The slides will be made available on our website, as well as the task force dam safety report. You may have covered this. I have a historical question that intrigues me. This state is barely 170 years old. How or why do we have so many dams?
So this is Douglas. I'll start on this. Many years ago, when I was working for the Department of Natural Resources, I had a reason related to some cases that we were involved in to read most of Michigan's statutes and Supreme Court opinions from the period, essentially from the 1830s into the late 1880s. And dams were a major item of consideration during that period. That was the first source of energy, really, for our civilization. So some of it was water powered directly, and then later on, we started to adapt them for producing electricity. So a lot of our initial settlements and development was centered around these dams. That's why so many small former mill dams are found in the center of Michigan's communities. So that's really the historical origin. We certainly have more dams now that were built in the 20th century, but most of these dam sites were already occupied by the end of the 19th century. And dams have been rebuilt or supplemented or something, since then. But it's really our history started, our settlement history and industrial history started around dams.
It's just phenomenal to me. I mean, you're talking an average of 31 dams per county. And we know that there's probably more, I'm sure that there are more in some than there are in others, but it's just,
Yes.
it just kind of blows my mind.
Well, part of it also is that we adopted this system for lake level control. We don't, people who own houses on lakes
Right.
Don't want their lake level rising and falling. They want to maintain consistency of a water level. So a large number of these dams are relatively low head, but they are there to provide for consistency of lake level. Whether you agree with that or not, but that's one of the reasons we have a lot of dams in developed areas.
Right, and that accounts for, I would guess, a majority of the 20th century dams.
I would just piggyback what Douglas and Bill said, that maybe the dams were built for a purpose such as powering a mill or aiding in logging or things like that at the turn of the century, and there's been maybe a couple iterations of the dam if it was failed or reconstructed or whatever, but a lot of those don't serve that purpose anymore, and they're just for recreation now because the impoundment has been developed, or even if just a few houses or one property is around the impoundment, it's more for fishing and recreation and things like that. So I think that's part of the issue too, is that the dams were built so long ago, they no longer serve that purpose. They maybe no longer have that associated funding revenue, and now it's the private entities or the municipalities or whoever else that owns them bear the responsibility to maintain that structure that is aging. So but yeah, the vast majority of dams in Michigan, the primary purpose is recreation. So
Well, we've just about run out of time. I want to thank the three of you. Anything further that you'd like to add or points you'd like to emphasize?
This is Douglas. I have just a brief comment. There is a tendency to think of dams as geological features. They are not. The flow of water and the pressure of impoundment on a dam is an inexorable, degradation of the dam. So you can't just ignore them forever. The time will come when you either have to make significant investments to repair or replace, or the dam becomes a risk and will eventually go away. So because we have gone so long, as Bill was stressing, we really are in a position where, we're not saying, next week all the dams are going to fail, but we can't just keep ignoring it. Clear recommendation from the task force is that it is necessary to act reasonably soon on most of our recommendations, or there will be unfortunate and undesirable consequences down the line.
Bill, anything you'd like to add?
I think Douglas summarized it very, very well.
I think he did.
This is a problem we have ignored for far too long. And we in Michigan have ignored, the nation has ignored, but we in Michigan have ignored it too. And it's time to act. And we're going to need help from all kinds of people to push the legislature, to push the agency, to push local governments to do the right thing so that make certain that the dams that remain are adequately financed and are maintained, or they get removed.
Luke, anything from your perspective?
No, I think they Doug and Bill did a great job. You know, we're happy to have, I mean, it's unfortunate that, you know, a disaster had to happen to kind of get the ball moving faster, but we're happy to have the attention, you know, and looking forward to what that brings as far as, you know, improvements to overall dam safety in the state of Michigan. Because I mean, that's our goal, right? Is to make sure that this stuff doesn't happen, or if it does happen, it's a lot less frequent. And so I just appreciate the opportunity and the folks who have helped so far. So.
Well, again, I want to thank the three of you. From my perspective, I couldn't agree more with the mantra I used to put forth, fix it first when it comes to infrastructure, fix it first. And this is another case in point. So I greatly appreciate Douglas and Bill, your leadership on the task force and on this particular issue, your continuing work. Luke, in the dam safety unit, clearly you have a burdensome task ahead of you. And hopefully you'll get the support you need over the course of time. My thanks to everyone for joining today. This public policy forum has been recorded and will be placed on our website in the very near future. Again, our next forum will be on April 7th, a broad-ranging discussion on K-12 schools post-pandemic recovery. Thank you again. Have a great day.